We've been doing some introductory material on Kashrut. So today we come to the biggie, the really thing, because obviously when we talk about Nevela, we talk about Treifa, we talk about Behema Tameya. Once you're committed to kosher, you're not going to move into those areas anyway. No one's going to buy a pork or ham or whatever. But we come to meat and milk, these are things that happen. Mix-ups and accidents. And when we talk about setting up a kosher kitchen, we are largely talking about creating the requisite separation between basar b'chalav. Now, basar b'chalav is very, very interesting prohibition because each thing by itself is totally kosher. The milk is kosher, assuming it's chalav Yisrael. That's another issue we discussed. The meat is kosher, but somehow, when they mix together, they acquire a characteristic that neither one of them has by itself, and it now becomes as asur as chazer. Basar b'chalav is an isur d'oraisa. So let's go over a little of the basic background. Some of it you might know, perhaps some of it you don't know. There are 3 verses in the Torah that are repeated in identical wordings. Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Do not cook a kid goat. Gedi is a kid goat, right? Gedi is the same as Gadja. Gadja in the song Chad Gadja, the one kid, that's Aramaic for goat. The Hebrew is Gedi. So the Torah says, do not seethe or cook a kid in its mother's milk. So interestingly enough, the Torah doesn't talk about eating or anything. It just do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. So here's what the Gemara tells us. The Gemara tells us that because this pasuk is repeated 3 times, and the Torah does not waste words, each time this verse is stated, it's coming to teach me a new prohibition. Prohibition 1 is the cooking of meat and milk. Indeed, that's what it says. Prohibition number 2 is the eating of meat and milk. Prohibition number 3 is a prohibition to derive benefit from milk and meat, even if you don't eat it. And I'll explain briefly what these are. So in Hebrew, we would say, one pasuk is Isur Bishul, the prohibition of cooking. The other pasuk is Isur Achila, the prohibition of eating. The third pasuk says, or is coming to teach me, Isur Hana'a, the prohibition of benefit. Again, I'll give you examples in a moment.
So what was the first one?
The prohibition of cooking.
Yeah, what was it in Hebrew?
Isur Bishul. Isur Bishul, the prohibition of cooking. Now, you may ask me an obvious question. If the second and third repetition is coming for eating and benefit, then why does the Torah use the word cooking? All 3 verses say don't cook. So here's the point. That basar b'chalav d'oraisa, even for eating, is only created if it was created through a cooking process. Okay, which means the following. Under Torah law, if I have meat, I do not have to wait 6 hours. That's Rabbanan, we'll come to that later. Moreover, under Torah law, I can actually have a glass of milk with my hot dog, or I could have unmelted cheese with my hamburger. Under Torah law, under Shem. Which means the only thing that is basar b'chalav d'oraisa is when meat has been cooked together with milk. So if you have a cheeseburger, if you have a hamburger with melted cheese, that may be a prohibition in Torah. Okay, which means basar b'chalav requires that milk or dairy, something dairy, be cooked with something meat. And if you have done that, Number one, you've committed the sin of cooking them together. That's a separate sin. In fact, this may be a problem. Let me give you a very practical example. Let's imagine that you're a professional chef in a non-kosher restaurant. It's not the greatest job if you're, but you keep kosher. You don't eat anything that you cook. So you might think, well, if I'm adding milk to this meat, I'm not eating it, and I'm giving it to Goyim. Are Goyim allowed to eat meat and milk? Yes, they are. So what sin am I committing? The answer is you're committing a sin because it is prohibited to cook meat and milk. Meaning, this is totally independent. Even if you're not going to eat it, you're not allowed to cook it. That's an issue d'oraisa, to cook meat and milk. Now, once the meat and milk was cooked, there is then another issue d'oraisa. You're not allowed to eat it, eat the mixture, and you're not even allowed to get benefits, such as feeding it. Now, what's an example of benefit that's not eating? Feeding it to your pets. Now, see, this is very interesting. Let's take dog food for a moment, because this raises an interesting question. If you have dog food that has meat in it, the meat is obviously not kosher. But in and of itself, that's not a halachic problem, because animals owned by a Jew are allowed to eat non-kosher food. So if, for example, the dog food... Thank you. Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. If, for example, the dog food has pork, even though pork is the worst, most treif of the treif, you can give pork to your dog. Your dog can eat treif, not a problem. But here's the thing. If it's milk mixed with meat, even though your dog can eat it, your dog has no issur eating meat and milk, but you're not allowed to get benefit from meat and milk. And when you feed it to your animals, you're getting benefit. That's what we mean by the third prong, issur hana'ah. You see, many treif things are not asur b'hana'ah. For example, chazer is not asur b'hana'ah. Behema tameya generally, like horse meat, is not asur b'hana'ah. Treifa, again, going back to last week, is not asur b'hana'ah. Blood is not asur b'hana'ah. It's only asur in consumption. Very few treif things are asur b'hana'ah. I'll mention those that are in a moment. Now, when something is not asur b'hana'ah, you're not allowed to eat it, but you could feed it to your animals because they don't have an aveira, and even though you're getting benefit because you're feeding your animals, but you're allowed to get benefit. But the two things that are asur b'hana'ah, which you're not allowed to even get benefit, are meat and milk that are cooked together, basar b'chalav, and the second is chametz on Pesach. That's why you understand that not only are you not allowed to eat chametz on Pesach, you're not allowed to feed your animal, your dog or your cat, chametz on Pesach. Well, first of all, you're not even allowed to own it. So, but putting aside the ownership issue, that's unique to chametz. Chametz is the only one that you can't even own. But chametz also means you can't derive benefits, so I would not be allowed to feed. Right. So one example of benefit is feeding it to your animal. Another would be selling it to a non-Jew. Meaning, if I have a side of nevela, in fact, I mentioned this. I mentioned that the Ashkenazi custom is that because it's so difficult to remove the sciatic nerve, the hindquarters of cows are sold to non-Jews. And if there are nevelos that weren't shechted properly, or if there are treifos that have various perforations, so what do? We sell them to non-Jews for money. And that's allowed, because when something is only usher in eating and not in benefit, you can't sell it to a Jew because you're causing a Jew to sin. But you can sell it to a non-Jew. But basar b'chalav, you would not be allowed to sell even to a non-Jew. Just like chametz, because of course chametz you sell before Pesach, but you can't sell it on Pesach to a non-Jew because you're getting benefit. Right? Does everyone understand the difference between the isur achila and the isur hana'a? The isur achila is the prohibition of eating. The isur hana'a is an extra prohibition of basar b'chalav, in which you're not even allowed to get benefit, such as feeding it to your animal, to your pet, or selling it to a non-Jew. In fact, many opinions say you're not even allowed to give it as a gift to a non-Jew, because you're getting a benefit because the non-Jew is going to be grateful to you. So that you can leave it out and make it hefker and nobody knows it's from you. But if I give it to the non-Jew as a gift, the non-Jew is going to think I'm a great guy, and that's called getting benefit from the meat and milk. But you understand?
Can you repeat the Hebrew phrase for the prohibition of eating?
Yeah, okay. Isur means prohibition. Isur achila is the prohibition of eating. Isur hana'a is the prohibition of benefit. And in addition, we have Isur bishul. There's an Isur of cooking it. Meaning, even if I'm working as a chef in a non-kosher restaurant, and I'm not going to eat it, and I'm not going to sell it, I don't own the restaurant, I'm not selling it, the actual cooking is prohibited. That's very unique. It's not usher to cook treif. If you ask me a question, am I allowed to cook chazer so a non-Jew would eat it? Again, it's not the greatest choice of job, I understand that. But technically it's kosher. So this is actually a very important halacha for you to know if any of you are planning on training. You know, there are Orthodox people who do it. You want to train as a professional chef. So there are very, very few kosher culinary schools that are professional. But let's say you want to go to Cordon Bleu, you want to go to these really, really fancy places. And what are they doing? French cooking in particular, treif French cooking. Okay, once you're in the kosher restaurant, you'll use margarine or some other stuff. But when you're doing the actual French cooking, you're putting butter in the chicken and butter in the beef. Well, beware that even if you're totally committed, first of all, it's very hard to train as a chef if you don't taste your food. Okay, but let's assume you're willing to do that and they let you do that. You say, I can't taste it. In fact, there are some very, very good professional chefs who are vegan or vegetarian, meaning they don't cook vegan or vegetarian. They actually work cooking meat dishes, and they never taste them. They never taste them because they themselves are vegan. So the point I'm making is, even if you got into a cooking school where they didn't make you taste the food, you will have a problem cooking that food because there's an Isur D'Oraisa. Yeah, I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm saying it because it is really, I think, surprising halacha for many people that they wouldn't realize the implications. That's why if you can get into a kosher cooking school, which I think they have a few of them in Israel, that would be best. But again, I have to admit, they don't have the prestige of the international non-kosher ones. Okay, any questions about that generally? Okay. Now, here's something to know though. What if I cook a piece of meat in a dairy pot? Not allowed to do that. Or I cook some milk or some dairy thing in a meat pot. So here's the point I want to make. Under Torah law, that's not meat and milk at all, because the Torah, again, I'm talking about the Torah prohibition. We're going to get into all sorts of rabbinic laws in a moment. The Torah prohibition says there has to be an actual piece of meat and an actual milk or cheese or cream or the like. Meaning, even if you cooked the dairy in a fleishik pot, or you cooked the fleishik in a milchik pot, that is not cooking meat and milk, and that does not even create meat and milk on a Torah level. So the Torah's prohibition is very, very different than the familiar laws as we know them today. And we'll talk about in a moment why the Rabbanan made those rules, and we'll talk about it. But under Torah law, I can have milk with my hamburger. Under Torah law, I don't have to wait 6 hours. Under Torah law, I could cook meat in a dairy pot, and I could cook milk in a meat pot. Right? Under Torah law. And the only thing that's prohibited is to actually cook the meat and cook the milk, or the cream, or the cheese, or the leg. Okay. Now, a few more points about meat and milk. Again, these are very basic, general ideas. The laws of meat and milk apply only if both the meat and the milk are otherwise a kosher species. So, for example, if you cook chazer, you cook pork with milk, there is no additional meat and milk prohibition that's implicated. Now, does that mean I can eat pork that's cooked in milk? Of course not. Pork that's cooked in milk is still pork. So what is the significance of my saying, but it's not meat and milk, it's only pork? Well, there's a big difference. Pork you can sell to a non-Jew or give it to your dog. Meat and milk you cannot sell to a non-Jew or give it to your dog. So if pork was cooked in milk, I could give it to my dog. In other words, it doesn't acquire the new isser of basar b'chalav, right? In other words, basar b'chalav only applies if the meat is from a kosher animal, and by the same token, the milk has to be from a kosher animal, which would normally be the case. That is, if you cooked even kosher meat in donkey milk, which is very, very vitamin rich, actually, it's a luxury item and super expensive. I mean, it sounds sick, but the truth is, it is actually a luxury item in super expensive health stores. They make it into powder. So actually, it's not meat and milk. In other words, it's donkey milk, so it's treif, but it doesn't get the extra love meat and milk. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, however, this is true only if the meat or the milk is from a non-kosher species, like pork or donkey. But if it's from kosher meat that's a nevela or a treifa, there will be an issur of basar b'chalav. Okay, let me give you an example. Remember what nevela is. Nevela is simply meat from a kosher animal, like a cow, that was not shechted properly. So, for example, you walk into any non-kosher supermarket. So you look at the hamburger, you look at the steak. It's from a kosher animal. It's not pork. It's beef. But it's not kosher because it was not shechted. And last week we talked a little bit about the shechita process. So what is the name of meat from a kosher animal that was not shechted? It's called nevela. So let's say I took a non-kosher steak and I cooked it with milk. There, the law of basar b'chalav will apply. So until I cooked it with milk, I couldn't eat the steak because it's nevela, but I could give it to my dog or sell it to a non-Jew. If I cook it with milk, it now becomes basar b'chalav, and it gets those extra prohibitions. So do you see the difference here between cooking pork with milk versus cooking non-kosher steak with milk? Because non-kosher steak, assuming it's beef, comes from a kosher animal as opposed to pork, which is a non-kosher animal. And then the same thing is true with the milk, etc. Okay, now, final introductory point about basar b'chalav.
So sorry, I don't think I understood the last point properly.
Yeah.
So if you have a cow that wasn't checked properly, it can be cooked in milk technically, and you can derive benefit from it, but you can't eat it.
No. You
All of the
everything. Yeah, everything.
So even though, but hold on, kosher species, not the other two things that you said. Okay.
No, yeah, that's correct.
So like the carcass doesn't have to be like perfectly kosher. It just has to be the kosher species.
That's correct.
Okay.
If it's a kosher species, all of the laws of meat and milk apply to it in full.
Got it.
Okay. Now, final rule. Since when the Torah talks about the prohibition, it uses the example of a goat cooked in its mother's milk, Chazal understood that the prohibition of basar b'chalav only applies to milk-producing animals, even if they're kosher, like cows, goats, and the like. Whether it's female or male, I don't mean that the meat has to be a female, but it has to be that species that produces milk. Which means, actually, under Torah law, yet another surprise, chicken and milk, under Torah law, is actually prohibited. I'm sorry, it's actually permitted.
They don't see chicken as like meat in the Torah.
That's correct. People got confused, so the rabbis made certain extensions. But under Torah law, you are allowed to have chicken and butter. Not only don't you have to wait 6 hours, you can even cook them. You can cook them together. You can eat them together. And obviously, if you can even eat them, you can certainly derive benefit. Okay, so these are kind of the introductory main ideas of the prohibition of meat and milk. It does not apply to non-kosher species. It does not apply to birds. It does apply to kosher species, even if they're technically not kosher because of nevela or treifa. And when the laws do apply, they only apply to the meat and the milk that is cooked together. It does not apply to having milk with the meat, and it does not apply to a waiting period. All of those things are things that were added later. Which means, if you think about this, under Torah law, there's actually no reason, under Torah law, why you'd have to have a separate kitchen at all. Meaning, under Torah law, there's nothing wrong with cooking meat in dairy dishes or pots and cooking milk in meat dishes. As long as you're not mixing actual milk and meat, there is no problem. So I understand this can make a person yearn for those old Torah days. A kosher kitchen would be much, much, much easier to maintain when you didn't have to be concerned with all of these separations, because the Torah law of meat and milk is only if actual meat is cooked with actual milk or cheese, something dairy, and not if meat is cooked in a dairy pot or the like. And certainly there was no requirement whatsoever of waiting 6 hours. Now, obviously, anyone that has even the minimal familiarity with a kosher kitchen knows that that's not the way we live. We have all sorts of rules that are superimposed on everything. So let me just mention what some of those rules are again. This actually is probably more familiar to you than the first part of what I said, because these are the things you actually do. Number one, the sages, the rabbis of the Talmud, prohibited eating milk and meat together, even if they were not cooked together. So there's kind of a chronological sequence here. The first extension is that even if you didn't cook the cheese and the hamburger, you cannot have cheese with your hamburger or milk with your hot dog, because there was a fear, this is the traditional fence around the Torah, that if we allow you to eat them together, you might come to cook them together, etc. Okay, so that's stage number one of the extension. Don't eat them together. And what is that adding? Even though they were not cooked together. So that's extension number one. Now, Extension number 2 is built on extension number 1. Once the Chachamim made a takana, don't eat them together. So they then went a little further and they said, in order to be sure you don't eat them together, we have to have a certain amount of distancing between one and the other. Now, what that distancing is not entirely clear in the Gemara, and there are many, many different minhagim, meaning many, many different customs as to what the distancing is. As you know, the most common custom is waiting 6 hours between meat and dairy. I'm going to start with that one because that is the most common one. But even within that most common one, there's a surprising amount of variation. Right? You got to wait 6 hours from meat to dairy. Now, first of all, keep in mind that you're not counting the 6 hours from the end of your meal. You're counting the 6 hours from the end of your eating of meat. That's important to know. Let's assume you have a long Shabbos lunch, and you began the lunch at 11 o'clock, and you finish the meat course by 12, but you're eating potato kugel or salad or dessert for another hour, fruit for another hour. Okay, I'm losing track of whatever time I said. But let's assume, in other words, you stopped eating meat at 12, but you didn't finish the meal till 1. So you need to know the 6 hours do not run from 1. They actually run from 12. Now that gives you a little benefit there, because if you stopped eating meat, even if you didn't bench, your 6-hour clock runs from the meat, not from the benching. Okay. But even with that, there are at least 3 different views about the 6 hours. Is it 6 full hours? Is it 5 hours and 31 minutes, meaning to say a majority of the 6th hour? Or, this is kind of cheating, but some opinions say, as long as you enter the 6th hour, even by 1 minute, 5 hours and 1 minute would qualify as 6 hours because you're already in the 6th hour, right? So we have 3 opinions regarding 6 hours, 6 full hours, 5 hours, 31 minutes, 5 hours and 1 minute. If you don't have a particular custom, or if your Rav has not instructed you what to do, then you really should wait 6 full hours.
We'll wait less than that also.
No, I'll talk about that. I'm talking about the minute. Right now I'm only discussing the minute of 6 hours. I'll talk about the other minute. Okay? So this is the minhag of 6 hours. And within the minhag of 6 hours, there are 3 variations. However, there are other minhagim besides 6 hours that are much more lenient. The German minhag, for those who are of German descent, meaning their families come from Ashkenaz, which is German, they only wait 3 hours. And again, you'd have the same machlokas, 3 full hours, 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 5 minutes. Although there I think, you don't have to cheat. It's a short enough time anyway. Okay, that's a 3-hour minhag. And then we have Dutch, which has the minhag of 1 hour. 1 hour. Now, the general rule is, if you don't have a family tradition that goes with the more lenient customs, one should follow the 6 hours. That's what it is. And if one wants to do a lesser shiur, well, perhaps that would be permitted if you follow all the minhagim. If you follow all of the what are called yekesha minhagim, perhaps you could follow this one too, but you cannot pick and choose. Okay. Now, so keep in mind this. I'm calling this extension number 2. Extension number 1 is don't have milk with meat, even if they weren't cooked. Extension number 2 is the waiting period rules. That's a separate extension. Now, why are there waiting period rules? So there's actually a machlokas. Is the waiting period rule, let's say, why when I eat meat, do I have to wait 6 hours or 3 hours or 1 hour, whatever your minhag is, before I eat milk? So there are 2 reasons the poskim give for this. Reason number 1 is that when you eat meat, meat can get stuck in your teeth. So as a result, if I would have milk shortly after the meat, the milk and the meat would mix. But the theory is, once you've waited X number of hours, the meat is kind of digested, even in your teeth, it's kind of disintegrated, and it doesn't count. So according to that, the problem is the meat in your teeth. And then there's another reason that the fatty meat often sticks in your throat. It kind of coats your throat with a certain meat taste. And therefore the milk would come in contact with that meat taste. So the machlokas is the issue the basar between your teeth, or is the issue the fatty residue in your throat? But that is the basis of the waiting period. Now, what about the opposite? So the waiting period, as you know, again, I mean, this you know from common practice, just to understand a little bit. The waiting period is I eat meat, I gotta wait 6 hours till I have milk. What about if I had dairy first? If I had dairy first, is there any waiting period for me to have meat? So some will wait a half an hour. They'll wait a little bit based on a Zohar. Others do not wait, and we paskin you do not have to wait at all, but you do have to rinse your mouth out. So if I drank a glass of milk and now I want to have a piece of meat, I need to rinse my mouth out and preferably even chew something like either a piece of bread or an apple to kind of cleanse the taste of the dairy from your mouth. But other than that, there is no waiting period. However, there is one category of dairy which is treated as severe as meat, and that is called Gavina Kosher. Gavina Kosher literally means hard cheese. Now, hard cheese is given a definition in halacha. Hard cheese is defined as cheese that has been aged at least 6 months, and it is very hard. Right? You chew it, it gets stuck in your teeth just like meat. Hard cheese, the Ramah paskins, must be treated like meat, and you must wait 6 hours before you have meat. Right? If I had hard cheese, now here I think people go a little crazy. There are a lot of rabbis in Israel who actually say that the standard, what you call yellow cheese in Israel, the regular cheese, the yellow cheese in Israel, has the status of hard cheese, and you have to wait 6 hours before you have meat. Some very, very distinguished rabbis took that position. I have no right to argue with them, but I'll just say that it makes no sense to me. The standard yellow cheese in Israel is not particularly hard. It's not particularly pungent. It does not stick in your teeth that much. I'm sure you've seen or eaten hard cheese that's really, really hard, that you can break your teeth on. But the standard yellow cheese, I myself do not treat it as hard cheese, but there are opinions that do. So be aware of the hard cheese issue. And then there's a huge machlokes, very important. Is the chumrah of hard cheese, does that apply when it has been melted? Right, let's say pizza. Right, pizza, lasagna. Now, you can use even hard cheese to make a lasagna, but it's been melted down. So there are opinions that say the chumrah, the strictness, the stringency of hard cheese is only when it hasn't been melted or even grated, but it's been melted or grated, you do not have to wait a year. So these are really different opinions. Again, if you are Chabad, you'll want to check what the minhag, or you may know what the minhagim of Chabad are on this, but these are kind of the issues, okay? So certainly we have the 6 hours, we have the 3 hours, we have the 1 hour, we have meat to cheese requires the waiting. Cheese to meat does not require waiting unless it is hard cheese, and hard cheese itself may not be considered hard if it was grated or melted, and therefore there would not be a waiting period at that point. Okay? Now, again, that is what we call extension number 2. Okay, again, I want you to see this sequentially. Extension number 1 of the rabbinic prohibition was do not have milk and meat together even if they weren't cooked. Extension number 2 is waiting periods. And again, we discussed that briefly. Extension number 3 is applying all of this to chicken, because under Torah law it didn't apply to chicken. So that means not only is chicken cooked in butter going to be forbidden rabbinically, but even the waiting periods and even having a glass of milk with the chicken is going to be forbidden, etc. The only thing is, I don't want to overcomplicate things. There are opinions that say that since the whole issur of basar b'challah for chicken is only midrabanan, it's only usher in eating, but it's mutter b'hanah. So some do say that if you have chicken cooked in butter, you would be allowed to sell it to a guy or give it to your pet. Because the chumrah of hana only applies to basar b'chalav under Torah law and not basar b'chalav through rabbinic enactment. But the one thing that is categorical is you do have to have waiting periods, even for chicken, and it is, of course, usher to eat chicken cooked in milk. That for sure is going to be usher. But that is midrabanan. Interestingly enough, the Mishnah tells us that there were some rabbis who did not go with this decree. And in their communities, they allowed people to cook chicken in milk and eat it. There actually were rabbis who permitted it, but that's not followed today at all. Halachically, that is not allowed. But if you would have gone back a time machine 2,000 years ago, you would have found chachamim who actually permitted the consumption of chicken and milk, because under Torah law it is not basar b'challah. Okay. Any questions about the first 2 extensions? So I mentioned 3 extensions. Extension 1 of the rabbis is don't eat meat and milk together even if they weren't cooked. Extension 2 of the rabbis are waiting periods. Extension 3 of the rabbis is extending all of these laws to chicken and milk, and not only meat and milk, because chicken gets confused with meat. By the way, it does not apply, for a moment, to fish and milk. Right? There is no issur to have fish and milk. And let me talk a little bit about that, though, because it is interesting. There may be a difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Yeah, sorry.
I just have a question about from the dairy to meat. I thought that some people wait an hour.
Okay, well, I mentioned half an hour, but some might wait up to an hour. Yeah. But the Shulchan Aruch says that you don't have to wait at all. the truth is,
So then why would people wait?
well, they want to be machmir. The truth is, it's based on the Zohar, but it's not really an hour. It's a little more complicated. The Zohar says one must be careful not to eat meat and milk within the same hour. Now, that's a little tricky. What that would mean is, if I ate the milk at 2 o'clock, I should not have meat until 3 o'clock. But that also means, if I ate the milk at 2:55, I could have the meat at 3 o'clock. It's not the same hour. So some people say, since it's hard to tell people, sometimes you wait 5 minutes, sometimes you wait 60 minutes. So they always wait 60 minutes. But in reality, the 60 minutes is a stringency based on the Kabbalah of the Zohar not to eat them in the same hour. Okay. Those who are not machmir, they don't follow the Zohar because the Shulchan Aruch does not say that this is a requirement. Okay, let me talk a little bit about fish for a moment. Fish, of course, is an animal. It's animal life. And yet, many of the halachos of meat do not apply to fish. For example, the blood in fish is not forbidden blood. Number one. Number two, fish don't have to be shechted. There's no shechita for fish. You just pull them out of the water, and when they're dead, they're dead. Right? And number three, there is technically no prohibition of meat and milk on fish. So you can have fish with butter or whatever it is. Now, there are some laws connected to fish, though, that are unique, which have nothing to do with basar b'chalav, but they're connected. That is, you're not allowed to cook fish together with meat. Right? You cannot cook fish and meat. And the reason that's so is nothing to do with basar b'chalav, obviously. But it's because Chazal say it's dangerous to eat fish and meat together. Like, even if they're not cooked. In other words, like you'll notice in an Orthodox house, those of you that grew up in those homes know this, when they serve you the filter fish, there's a separate fish plate, a separate fish fork. Then the plate is removed. That's when Hasidim have a l'chaim. They drink some alcohol to clear their palate. That's the excuse that they have to drink. Eat a piece of challah, and only then do they eat meat, because they don't want the fish particles and the meat particles to mix in their mouths, because Chazal say this is a sakana, and it may cause leprosy. Now, in truth, this is one of the rules which we don't fully understand on a scientific basis. I mean, if you would ask a doctor, is there any problem with taking a piece of fish and a piece of meat in my mouth at the same time? A doctor wouldn't be able to tell you. But Chazal identified this as a sakana of fish and meat. Now, some people are so strict, therefore, they will not cook fish in a fleishik pot. They'll have a distinct fish pot. But under strict halacha, you don't need it. You don't need that, because as long as it's not actual meat with actual fish, the sakana does not apply in just cooking it in a fleishik pot. Now, this actually raises an interesting problem with a well-known condiment that people use as a kind of a barbecue sauce. And that is, have you heard of Worcestershire sauce? It's like a steak sauce. You can put it on different things. But Worcestershire sauce is flavored with anchovies. So anchovies is fish. So how can I pour Worcestershire sauce, even if it has no yolk? I'm talking about it has no yolk. It's kosher. It's certified kosher. But how can I use it with meat dishes? I'm pouring something that has fish in my meat. I'm eating fish and meat. So this is machlokas poskim. Some poskim say that since the percentage of anchovies in the Worcestershire sauce is less than 1 part in 60, it's nullified in 60, just like a drop of milk is nullified in a meat soup, and therefore it would be mutter. Others say the rule of 60 doesn't work here because you can taste it. I mean, it's there for taste, and if it's imparting a definitive taste, you can't just say it's non-existent. So when you want to buy Worcestershire sauce and you want to use it for your meat dishes, be aware that there is a problem here. Now, okay. Now this problem of fish is fish and meat. What about fish and milk, fish and dairy, fish and butter? So most opinions have no problem with that because they say this sakana, the danger that the Chazal identified, is only with fish and meat. Fish and dairy has no problems whatsoever, and therefore no problem with butter on your fish. However, many Sephardim, interestingly enough, are very machmer, and many Sephardim take the position that the sakana of fish and meat includes anything that comes from a meat animal, including milk, butter, and the like. Now, again, don't misunderstand me. This is not a meat and milk law, so there's no 6-hour wait here. Nobody is saying you got to wait 6 hours between fish and milk. Nobody is saying that, or even between fish and meat. It's not a 6-hour thing. But the Sephardim are machmir. They will not eat fish that was cooked with milk, butter, or cheese. Okay, but Ashkenazim are makel on it. We only have that problem with fish and meat. Now again, I don't want to confuse you. This whole thing about fish is not because of the rules of meat and milk. It is simply a separate concern of sakana. You know, again, there are certain rules in the Shulchan Aruch which were concerns that the sages identified as health concerns, even though scientifically we really can't trace it. Fish and meat is one of them. I'll give you another halacha that's relevant that you may have heard, and that is eggs, peeled eggs, like hard-boiled eggs, and onions that were left overnight. A peeled onion, meaning not in its skin, and a peeled egg, like a hard-boiled egg, that was left overnight, the Talmud says, is a danger to eat. And that's even if it's in the refrigerator. That's not because it's not refrigerated. Now, that makes it pretty hard. So what do you do with hard-boiled eggs? You can only make hard-boiled eggs like for one day. So there, it is a sakana, according to halacha, but that's only if the egg or the onion is not mixed with oil or salt. So what you do is, let's say you've cut up onions, and you want to freeze them or just refrigerate them. You want to use them for the next day, or you have hard-boiled eggs that you want to use the next day. So all you have to do, even very little, just put a few drops of olive oil on top of it. And again, I have no idea about the science here, and that will neutralize the whatever deleterious effects these foods have. This will apply to onions and to hard-boiled eggs. Then you have all sorts of machlokas. Does it apply to scallions, to different types of leeks? But anyway, the little bit of oil will do the trick to allow you to keep them.
Before you put them in the fridge.
Huh?
Before you put them in the fridge.
Before you put them in the fridge, or at least before they've stayed overnight. Meaning, any time, once they've stayed overnight, they're prohibited. You can't fix it at that point.
Okay.
So you can fix it until it's been overnight.
So I have a specific question on this front. I like to make hard-boiled eggs and then soak them in some sort of marinade so I can have them.
So you're fine. So you're great.
It doesn't. The recipe doesn't always call for oil.
Okay.
And how much oil would it need? Could it be
a few drops?
A few drops.
Yeah, a few
Okay.
drops.
So if I
The truth is, oil is lavdafka. I mean, whatever I mean, what non-oil marinade did you use? Vinegar?
Like soy sauce and
No,
like.
no, that's just as good. Yeah, yeah. When I say I didn't mean oil, but some type of acidic substance. Yeah,
Oil isn't acidic, is it?
not acidic, but
So like any liquid?
well, not water. It has to be a liquid
Okay.
that has some
Flavor.
some powerful flavor. Strong
Okay.
flavor.
So soy sauce is fine.
Strong flavored liquids would be fine.
Rice vinegar's fine.
Yep.
Okay.
Vinegar would be fine. Oil would be fine.
Tove.
Salad dressings are good. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Again, these are subconscious. I mean, truth is, Moshe finds them as a truth because if you think about this, think about commercial products that we buy. A lot of commercial products that we buy have eggs in them. Now, the factories, peel whatever, 10,000 eggs, and they sell a product that's going to last over months. They certainly didn't go to the trouble of putting stuff in it, whatever it would be. So Moshe actually has a shita that all of these prohibitions, these health prohibitions, do not apply to commercial entities. They apply only to small amounts that a person makes in their home. So he says it's not really a commercial concern when you're buying products. Okay.
Well, what about the fish and meat?
No, so fish and meat, that's a separate thing. That's a direct sakana, and that you have to be careful. That's where the Worcestershire sauce comes in, and everything else. Okay, and all right, and that's where the Jewish custom came to drink a l'chaim between the gefilte fish and chicken soup, because the alcohol kind of cleans your palate from the fishy taste. Okay, so that's the basis of that. But again, don't confuse it with meat and milk because it is not based on basar b'chalav. So in terms of basar b'chalav, we've talked about the Torah extension, and then the Torah law, and then we looked at 3 rabbinic extensions. Extension 1, don't have milk and meat together. Extension 2, waiting periods, and we went through different waiting periods. Extension 3, applying the rules to chicken, not just chicken, but any type of bird. And now we come to extension 4, which is the idea of absorbed taste. And this is kind of the fundamental idea of the kosher kitchen. Everyone knows that one of the main characteristics of a kosher kitchen is separate pots and pans for meat and dairy, and separate cutlery for meat and dairy, and separate dishes for meat and dairy. And the question is, where does that come from? So here, in order to understand it, I'm first going to talk about kashrus in general. Let's forget about meat and milk for a moment. Let's just talk about a person who was not keeping kosher, and they have pots and pans in which non-kosher food was cooked. There is a general principle in the laws of kashrus that when something non-kosher is cooked in a utensil, the utensil absorbs a taste from the non-kosher item, and that taste can in turn be transferred into the kosher item that you cook later. Again, let's take a simple case without looking at meat and milk for a moment. Let's assume I have a pot in which I once cooked chazer, or even I once cooked nevela, or treifa, or even I cooked unsalted meat that has blood, so the blood was absorbed. So the pot is treif, we say. I then cook kosher food in the pot. So there will be many circumstances where I'm not allowed to eat the food that was cooked in that pot. Now why? Why can't I eat kosher food that's cooked in a non-kosher pot? What's the problem? The problem is the following. When the non-kosher food was cooked in the pot absorbed some taste. When I then cook kosher food in the pot, the absorbed taste goes into the kosher food. So the reason I can't eat the kosher food is because it contains, or it might contain, we don't know for sure, it might contain a non-kosher taste that was imparted in the second round. So, to use some of the rabbinic terms, when the pot absorbs the non-kosher taste, that is called belia. Belia means swallowing. It absorbs it. Belia, Beis, Lamed, Yud, Ayin, Hey. Belia is swallowing. It swallows it. When I cook something else, it is polate. Paleta. Paleta means spitting out. So the whole regimen of kosher kitchens is based on a concept of belia and paleta. Absorption and giving out. Now, a few rules about this. In order for there to be absorption or spitting out, there has to be heat. In the absence of heat, there is no absorption. And in the absence of heat, there is no spitting out. Example. If I took a piece of pork and I put it in a pot, a kosher pot, and I didn't do any cooking in that pot, I didn't do any cooking. It just touched my kosher pot. And then I remove the meat, and of course I clean out the surface guk. That pot is a kosher pot because it doesn't internally absorb non-kosher residue unless there is a heating process. Heat. So this is an example where there was no belia because there was no heat. Now, let me give you another example. Let's assume I cooked the pork in the kosher pot. So the kosher pot is treif. It absorbed non-kosher taste. And then I put a kosher piece of meat in the treif pot without cooking. There, once again, the kosher meat is okay. Because yes, the non-kosher pot absorbed the treif, but it didn't give it out. You need heat to absorb, and you need heat to give out. Okay, you understand that concept? Now, what is the definition of heat? So heat is given a halachic definition. What's the measure of heat? So the definition of heat for halachic purposes is a temperature that is hot enough that it's called yad soledespo. Yad soledespo means if you would try to touch it, your hand would go back. That is said to be equivalent to the temperature that would burn a baby's stomach. So it's kind of a barbaric. I don't want to test it with my hand, so I'll put my baby on the, a little crazy. Now, obviously, Yad Soledespo does not give you an exact number. And different people have different tolerances. Some people can put their hand and fire. So there is a machlokas. It ranges from as low as 110 degrees to as high as 160 degrees. But for kashrus, we're strict. So we treat Yad Soledespo at the lower range. The requisite heat that causes absorption and spitting out, the heat has to be at least 110 degrees Fahrenheit. whatever that is in Celsius or the other systems. In other words, if I put a piece of pork in a kosher pot and I turned on the oven, and it didn't yet get, it takes a while, it didn't yet get to 110 degrees, even though it's warm. It's above room temperature, even above body temperature. But it didn't yet reach 110 degrees. And then I realized, oy vey, that meat is treif. And I pull it out. I throw away the meat. It's pork. But the pot is still kosher, because it doesn't absorb the chazer unless there is a temperature, even for a second, of yad soled espo, which is no lower, maybe higher, but it's certainly no lower than 110. And the same thing would be true if it's a treif pot and I have kosher meat in it. As long as I take out the kosher meat before it reaches 110, there's been no absorption. Okay, so this is the important rule about the transference of taste through belia and plata, that it does not apply unless there is the heat of yad soled espo. This explains, for example, let's look at meat and milk for a moment. If I take a halachic bowl, by that I mean a bowl in which there actually was hot meat and hot halachic soup, but I accidentally took it for breakfast in the morning, and I put in that bowl cereal and milk. I have cereal and milk in a halachic bowl. So, number one, the cereal and the milk do not become treif because the taste of the meat does not come into the milk without heat. And number two, the halachic bowl does not become treif because the taste of the milk does not go into the bowl. The taste of the meat does not go into the milk, and the taste of the milk does not go into the bowl. So what you should do is finish your cereal, rinse out the bowl with cold water, and put the bowl back with the meat with the halachic bowls. Now, it is customary, to be honest, if you want to have a good kosher kitchen, it's customary not to do this. We want to keep it separate because of mix-ups. But if accidents happen and there was no heat that's involved, in most cases, again, not in every case, this is why you need to ask a rabbi about these things, but in a lot of cases, without heat, there's no absorption. Okay, that is the idea of belia and plata, which requires yad soled espo. And this is a rule not just with meat and milk, this is a rule for kosher and treif. Okay. Now, rule number 2. The absorption that's in a vessel when there's been heat, the sages said, becomes rancid and inedible 24 hours from the absorption. It becomes like a rotten, rancid taste. And once it becomes a rotten, rancid taste, even if it goes into your kosher food, it doesn't forbid it because it no longer has the status of something edible. Let's illustrate it with an example. Let's say I cooked a piece of pork in a pot that had been kosher. The pot is now a non-kosher pot. Why? Because there was the temperature of yad soled espo, and it absorbed non-kosher food. I put the pot away. I don't use it for 24 hours. I forgot about it. 24 hours later or more, I take out the pot, and I accidentally cook kosher food in the pot. Now here, the pot absorbed the chazer when the chazer was cooked in it, and the pot gives out the taste of the chazer when I cook the kosher meat in it. There is belia and plita because it's yad soledes on both sides. Nevertheless, because whatever it spits out is already considered rancid by virtue of the 24-hour rule, the kosher food can be eaten, even though it absorbed a non-kosher residue, because the non-kosher residue is considered to be rancid and inedible. The vocabulary, a few vocabulary words here. This is called no same tam, 3 words, no same tam lifagam. It imparts a taste that is defective or inferior. No same tam lifagam does not prohibit the kosher food. And the vessel is called Eino ben Yoma, meaning it's not used within the same day. It's not used in other words, to put it in a sentence, a kli she'eino ben Yoma is no same tam lifgam. Okay, does that sentence make sense? A pot which had not been used for 24 hours imparts a rancid taste. Okay, so I actually used 2 different Hebrew expressions here. Kli she'eino ben yomo, no same tam lifagam. Now, this is huge, 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 huge. That actually means that a lot of food that's cooked in non-kosher pots and pans or served on non-kosher dishes, even with heat, if it's cold, you don't have a problem to begin with. Even with heat, is going to be mutter to eat,
Sure.
permitted to eat, because more than 24 hours has elapsed since it absorbed the non-kosher residue. And the non-kosher residue has become rancid, and it's no same tam lifgam. Everyone get that question? No same tam, it imparts a taste. Lifgam, that's inferior. So wait a second here. So you might be scratching your head and say, well, wait a second here. So why on earth do I have to kosher my kitchen at all to get rid of, to purge the treif and the like? I mean, if you didn't use it for 24 hours, the taste is rancid and it doesn't prohibit the kosher food. That's what we're saying, right? This is a huge rule. Then why do I have to bother to kosher? Let me just not use it for 24 hours. So here's the thing. So it's a little subtle. The Chachamim prohibited using an Eino ben Yomo, in other words, a kosher, a treif pot that absorbed the treif more than 24 hours ago, because if you got in the habit of using it, you might use a pot that's a ben Yomo. So there is a prohibition against using it. But if it was used, which it shouldn't have been, the food can be consumed. So, if you have a treif pot, and it's more than 24 hours since it absorbed the treif, and you were to ask me, am I allowed to cook kosher food in this pot? The answer is no, you are not allowed to cook kosher food in this pot. You're not allowed to use the non-kosher cutlery or dishes with heat, even though it's Eino ben Yomo, because the Rabbanan prohibited using Eino ben Yomo, lest you use ben Yomo. But if you did cook in the pot, and now you ask the rabbi, am I allowed to eat the food? The answer is yes. Now, this is going to be very important if you're going back to family who are not halachically observant. So let's assume mom agreed to buy only kosher food. And mom will give you exactly the hashgachos that you want, right? The best hashgachos in the world. But she's not willing to call the Chabad Shaliach to kosher the kitchen. That's too much. Too much. And let's assume mom would be very, very hurt if you wouldn't eat the special food that she's making for you, especially when she's accommodating all of your crazy kosher requests. Now, you can't compromise on kosher. I mean, you can't say, oh, you're not going to eat my pork chops. Okay, that unfortunately, you have to draw a line. But here's what I'm telling you. If the food is kosher, and the only problem is, mom is using pots in which there was non-kosher food, even though you would not be allowed to use those pots, you could not cook in those pots, you shouldn't do it. But the food that you're served that was cooked in those pots is going to be permitted as long as you know that more than 24 hours or more have elapsed since the non-kosher food was cooked there. This is based on the enormously important principle of no saying tam lifgam, that in a kli she'eino ben yomo, a kli that absorbed the tray not within the same day, meaning not within the preceding 24 hours, the taste that it imparts is rancid. Okay, I know it's kind of technical. You actually could go down to Mayanot and take a smicha test on this now, because these are kind of the basic subjects that smicha involves, the laws of meat and milk and the different permutations. But I hope this makes sense. If you're following me, which is a little technical, a little dense. Now, the same thing is true with meat and milk. Let's just swing over to meat and milk for a second. If I cook a piece of meat in a dairy pot, so it depends. If the milk had been cooked in the pot within 24 hours, that's called ben yomo, within the same day, then the taste of the milk is still good. So the milk then goes into the meat through the heat. I can't eat the meat. And by the way, even if I wait 24 hours, I can't eat the meat, because once it hits the food, it doesn't spoil. It only spoils in the pot, in the walls of the pot. Once it's in the food, it can stay indefinitely. But if I cook a piece of meat in an eino ben yomo pot, then whatever milk taste goes into the meat is treated as rancid and inferior, and it will not prohibit the meat. Same thing with spoons. Say again, didn't you?
If it is rancid, then it doesn't make it non-kosher?
That's correct, because it's not considered food. It loses its status as food, see? Rancidity is a plus when it comes to kosher. So this is why, I don't know if you've had experience asking rabbis meat and milk questions, but this is why you'll see over and over and over again that the first question is you're always going to be asked is, was the milk or the meat cooked within 24 hours of this? Because that's kind of the major question that is going to be asked. Ben yomo, eino ben yomo. If it's ben yomo, I'm going to introduce another variation. It's called no saying tam l'shvach. It imparts a good taste. If it's eino ben yomo, it's no saying tam lifgam. It imparts a rancid, inferior taste, and then it does not have the status of food. and it's not going to make it a meat or milk or even treif, even chazer. It's not going to make it a treif problem.
So why is it that if you accidentally put a meaty spoon into a milk drink or something or food, then you have to kosher that spoon? Why can't you just wait like 24 hours?
Okay, yeah, right. So this is what I said, that the rule of the 24 hours allows you to eat the food, but you're not allowed to rely on it, meaning I'm not allowed to use the pot even after 24 hours till I kosher it. I'm not allowed to use the spoon till I kosher it. But if I made a mistake and somebody else did it, I could eat the resulting food. Yeah. There's a certain rabbinic law that we don't want you to get in bad habits. So we don't let you use it unless you're kosher. Okay? So this is huge. I mean, really, this is like a piece of practical knowledge that can take away a lot of anxieties, a lot of fears that people have when they're going to confront, non-kosher kitchen or whatever. So obviously, in your own kosher kitchen, kosher everything. You don't use things that are Eino Ben Yoma. But in terms of somebody who serves it to you, so after the fact, you're allowed to eat that food.
What if they're serving it to you on a non-kosher dish?
I didn't understand again?
What if they serve it to you on a non-kosher dish?
So then there you do have a little bit of a problem because there you're using the non-kosher dish.
Now,
there you have a problem.
Take it from the non-kosher dish and put it on a paper plate, then you can eat the food.
That's correct. That's exactly right. So you need to negotiate a little bit that you need paper plates or whatever it is, but at least mom does not have to kosher the whole. Well, she should kosher it, but if she doesn't want to, at least that's not going to stop you from eating the food. And the same thing with the cutlery. There will be a problem with you using the cutlery. So get your own cutlery, etc.
How much is it a problem if like a Jew who isn't Shomer Shabbos cooks the food?
Okay, so that's an interesting issue. Let me just address that to be sure everyone is on the same wavelength. There's a whole other issue, nothing to do whatsoever with anything we talked about, and that is a law that says if a non-Jew cooks food for a Jew, even if the food is 100% kosher, and even if all of the kalim are 100% kosher, the fact that a non-Jew cooked the food may make it forbidden for you to eat. This was a rabbinic enactment to prevent intermarriage and socialization. Now, it doesn't apply to a lot of things. It doesn't apply to simple dishes. It only applies to banquet dishes. It's my focus, but that is, it applies to fancy stuff. So you can have a non-Jewish maid or aide make oatmeal or the like. But when you're talking about fancy food, there are problems. So the question you raised, I'll talk about this. This deserves a show on its own. I can't do it justice in 1 minute. But your question is, since for many purposes we actually say a person who violates Shabbos publicly is kind of like a non-Jew, would that mean that you'd have this problem of the food that was cooked by a non-Jew? Some are machmir, but derech klal we are not machmir, meaning we do not have that problem. So as long as mom is using the kosher ingredients, things are going to be okay. Okay. If mom's maid is doing the cooking, who's not Jewish, then you'd have that problem. Okay, but again, that really deserves a shiur on its own, because that's also very important when you have maids and you have let's say aides for the elderly. In fact, in Israel, the whole word Filipino means somebody from the Philippines. It's actually a term for an aide, no matter what country, because such a high percentage are Filipinos. Filipinos actually, it's kind of very angelic people. God bless them with extremely kind natures, and they love helping people. But they are non-Jewish, and as a result, anytime they do cooking in the house, there is potentially the problem of bishul honor. Yeah.
What do you think about some rabbis say that when you use glass plates or glass stuff that almost kind of supersedes a lot of laws?
Yes, that's very correct. We'll have to talk about it next week, but that's a very important principle. There are opinions that say that the whole concept through heat there is absorption, and then heat causes it to come out, does not apply to something like glass, which is said to be non-absorbent, and as a result, you don't have to kosher glass. You can use the same glass for meat and milk, and even if you had glass that was used with non-kosher food, you don't have to kosher it. So there are such opinions that say that, and at least for meat and milk. So for treif, we don't follow that. But for meat and milk, we are makel, and many people say you don't have to have separate glass dishes for meat and milk. But we'll talk about that
And
next
you
week.
don't have to total it
Do we have-
also?
huh?
You don't have to total it?
No, you do have to tovel. That's a separate thing. That's a separate thing. The obligation of tovel is for metal and glass, but the issue of koshering, some say, does not apply to.
Do you toivel things that are kitchenware?
No.
What? I've had this mug sitting in
So-
our kitchen for literally weeks because I've been reading the toilet.
No. So it depends though if it's glazed or it's stoneware. Meaning, if it's glazed earthenware has a glass glaze, so you are tovel it without a bracha. But if it's stoneware, which is just plain earthenware without a glaze, you can usually tell if there's a sheen on it, so you don't have to be tovel. Only metal.
I thought earthenware could be, I guess,
Maybe
kosher.
kosher, but if it's
Earthenware cannot be kosher. If it's treif, it cannot be kosher. But she
If
was
it's
talking.
fresh, it's everything.
She was talking about being
I
tovel.
see.
Yeah, thanks. She was talking about being tovel.
And
Again.
that's actually a Torah thing. That earthenware can be
Tovel is a separate issue. Tovel has nothing to do with kashrus. Meaning, if I buy something from the store and it was made in a non-Jewish establishment, even if it's totally new, it's totally kosher. I have to be tovel it before I use it for food preparation. That's a separate set of laws.
Okay.
That's not a kashrus issue. But that only applies to metal glass. It does not apply to earthenware unless the earthenware is glazed. Now, if earthenware actually became treif because you cooked something in it, it's considered to be so porous that there's no koshering process that could ever get out the stuff. Okay, but you look a little confused.
Yeah. I'm just circling back to the heat thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, by the time the food is on my plate, it's not like as hot as I'm like
Okay,
recoiling, right? So like, why do I need?
No,
to be separate?
then you don't. You're 100% correct. Meaning, if the temperature is going to be below the 110,
Yeah.
you got no problem. You got no problem.
Which like, how often is it not?
Well, a lot of times, I mean, if it's soup, for example, is definitely a problem.
It's fine.
You're giving soup in a.
But like, how often is it
Pasta. I like to eat it
like scalding hot?
I mean, 110 is not boiling. 110 is not extremely hot. Okay, but you're right. You're whatever it is, your point is correct. Your point is that any
So I'm
problem,
gonna give all my food
right?
is, like,
Any
room
problem,
temperature. I wouldn't
Yeah.
need to set it all.
Yeah.
If
if it's not going to be on Solet Espo, you have no problem in eating off a non-kosher plate.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
you know-
next week you said.
Yeah. So next week, when is Yom Tov? Is Sunday night? Sunday night. So I assume there's no class next week.
No, there's no class next Sunday.
Next Sunday. Okay.
Okay, so
Have a wonderful Yom Tov.